I still remember the morning the invitation arrived. A thick ivory envelope embossed with gold lettering, smelling faintly of cologne and ambition. My husband Ethan waved it in front of me like a trophy, grinning. "The annual gala," he said proudly. "Our biggest one yet." His company had grown faster than either of us imagined, and I'd been there for every late night, every risk, every moment he thought about giving up. I'd edited his proposals, balanced the books, even taken freelance work to keep us afloat. But when the company finally soared, everyone seemed to forget I had wings too. Still, I smiled and said, "Of course I'll be there." That was what a supportive wife did, even if the thought of sitting in the same room as his mother made my stomach twist. Evelyn, Mrs. Callahan to everyone else, never liked me. She said I was too independent, too opinionated, too ordinary for her son. I was the girl who came from a working-class family and didn't know which fork went with which course. She'd once accidentally introduced me as Ethan's assistant at a dinner party. I'd laughed it off, though my cheeks burned for hours afterward. So when the invitation came, that old anxiety resurfaced. I told myself it was just one night. I could smile, make small talk, and leave before she found a reason to whisper something cutting. It wasn't worth another argument with Ethan. He'd defend her every time. "She's just traditional," he'd say. "She doesn't mean it." But intent didn't stop the sting. The gala was to be held at the Meridian, one of those hotels that looked like money itself, where chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks and every step echoed wealth. I'd never been to one of Ethan's office parties since his promotion. He said they were mostly corporate talk, but I'd started noticing his growing distance. Fewer shared dinners, more late nights. I wanted to believe it was all work. I spent that week trying to convince myself that attending would remind him, and maybe her, that I was still part of this story. I picked out a sleek navy gown, the same color he once said made my eyes look like glass. I even had my hair done professionally, something I hadn't done since our wedding. As I looked at my reflection that night, I tried to silence the unease growing in my chest. Ethan seemed distracted when he picked me up, adjusting his cufflinks more than talking to me. "You look nice," he said absently. "Nice, not beautiful. Not stunning, just nice." The drive was quiet. The city lights glimmered against the windshield, but he barely looked at me. I stared out the window, pretending not to notice the small frown he wore, the way he kept checking his phone. Every vibration made his fingers twitch. When I asked who it was, he smiled faintly and said, "Just work. Always work." At the hotel entrance, photographers lined the marble steps, flashing bulbs capturing executives and their wives as if they were royalty. I hesitated before stepping out, smoothing invisible wrinkles. A staff member opened the door and greeted us warmly. Ethan straightened his jacket, instantly transforming into the charming leader everyone admired. The ballroom shimmered with gold, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Every corner screamed opulence, flowing champagne, live music, polished conversation. I recognized some of the people who had once come to our small apartment when the company was just a dream. Now they barely glanced my way, their eyes trailing past me toward Ethan's mother, who stood like a queen near the center of the room. Evelyn looked radiant, too radiant. A diamond necklace caught the light, and her smile stretched wide when she saw us. "Ethan!" she exclaimed, air-kissing both his cheeks. Then her gaze shifted to me, softening just enough to seem polite. "And you," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd come this year." Her tone made it sound like a mercy visit. I smiled anyway. I wouldn't miss it. She looped her arm through Ethan's and began parading him around, introducing him to guests while I trailed behind like an accessory. Every now and then, someone would nod at me vaguely, assuming I was someone's assistant again. As I sipped my champagne, I caught my reflection in the tall mirrors, poised, elegant, but somehow invisible. Around me, laughter rose like bubbles. I could feel eyes glance over me, assessing, dismissing. I wasn't sure if it was my dress or my presence that made me seem out of place. Then, from across the room, I saw her. A young woman standing near the stage, talking animatedly with Ethan's mother. She couldn't have been more than 25. Tall, sleek, confident. I'd never seen her before, but the way Evelyn leaned in close told me she was someone important. My stomach tightened, though I couldn't explain why. Ethan caught my gaze and gestured that he'd be right back, moving toward them. As I watched the three of them together, his mother, this stranger, and the man I once built a life with, a strange chill crawled up my spine. Something about their laughter felt rehearsed, like I was watching a scene I wasn't supposed to see. I forced a smile and turned away, my heart sinking even as the orchestra swelled. I didn't know this night would change how I saw everyone. Forever. The moment we stepped farther into the ballroom, the transformation was instant. Ethan and his mother became the picture of family perfection. Laughter timed like choreography, smiles polished to brilliance. She'd touch his arm when he spoke, tilt her head just enough to seem adoring, and every guest mirrored her admiration. "Ethan, you've done wonders for the company," one man said, clapping his shoulder. Another added, "You must be so proud, Mrs. Callahan. Your son's leadership is unmatched." Not once did anyone glance at me. I stood beside them, a practiced smile on my face, hands folded loosely around my clutch. I tried to look natural, supportive, content, invisible. My presence was acknowledged only through polite nods, as though I were there to balance the photograph, not to belong in it. Someone even asked if I worked in marketing for the firm, and I laughed softly before correcting them. "I'm Ethan's wife," I said. Their eyes flickered briefly, surprised, before moving on to the next conversation. Evelyn thrived under the attention. Every time Ethan was praised, she basked as though the success were hers. "He's always had such drive," she'd say, her voice dripping with pride. "Ever since he was a little boy. I knew he'd go far." I waited for her to mention the years when we scraped by, when I sold my jewelry to help fund his first business loan, when I typed late-night proposals while he slept on the couch. But my name never passed her lips. I could feel myself shrinking in the shadow of their act, the mother who claimed his triumphs, and the husband who let her. "Darling, smile," Ethan whispered through his teeth as a photographer passed by. I turned toward the camera, forcing warmth into my expression. The flash caught us, his arm around my waist, our bodies close but disconnected. In the photo, we probably looked perfect too. The music softened as the host took the microphone, announcing dinner service. Tables glittered with crystal and silver. I found our place near the center, right beside the executives and their wives. Exactly where Evelyn wanted to be seen. As I settled into my chair, she leaned toward me with that tight, polite smile. "It's so nice to see you dressed up," she murmured, eyes scanning my gown. "Navy suits you. Though, of course, it's a bit understated for an event like this." It wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder. Before I could respond, her attention snapped elsewhere. Her lips curved, eyes lighting up as she waved at someone entering the room. I followed her gaze, and my stomach tightened. The young woman from earlier was walking in, poised and radiant. Her name echoed through murmurs. Sophie, Ethan's new intern. Everyone seemed to know her. She had that effortless kind of confidence people are drawn to. Tall, graceful, with a smile that made men stand straighter. And she was wearing a dress nearly identical to mine, except hers shimmered subtly under the light, the fabric richer, the cut more daring. She looked like the younger, more glamorous version of what I'd tried to be. I felt the heat rise in my chest as whispers began. Evelyn turned toward Ethan, smirking. "She cleans up beautifully, doesn't she?" Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, she's great at everything she does." Everything she does. The words hit harder than they should have. I picked up my champagne glass to hide my trembling fingers, forcing a steady breath. The room buzzed around me, but I could barely hear anything past the pounding in my ears. Evelyn beckoned Sophie over, her eyes bright with excitement. "Ethan, darling, look who's here, your favorite intern." Sophie smiled warmly, extending her hand to me. "You must be Mrs. Callahan. I've heard so much about you." There was no malice in her tone, just innocence wrapped in charm. Still, something about it twisted deep inside me. "Likewise," I said, matching her smile, even as Evelyn added, "She's such a breath of fresh air around the office. So smart, so refined. Reminds me of myself at her age." I caught Ethan's glance, that flicker of pride, admiration, something else I couldn't name. My throat tightened. Evelyn wasn't just praising her. She was presenting her. For the rest of the evening, they moved together effortlessly. Ethan and Sophie laughing over inside jokes, Evelyn watching them like a proud matchmaker. I sat there, surrounded by gold and laughter, my heart slowly sinking beneath the weight of their performance. The perfect family, the perfect son, the perfect intern, and me, the unnecessary piece in a picture I had helped frame. I smiled for the rest of the night, not because I wanted to, but because I refused to let them see me break. Deep down, though, something had already cracked at first. I thought it was just my imagination. The quiet pauses when I approached a group, the way conversations shifted mid-sentence, the subtle glances that followed Sophie whenever she passed. I told myself people always gossiped at events like this. It was easier to believe that than to admit what my gut was already screaming. The dinner plates had just been cleared when I caught the first whisper. 2 women from Ethan's marketing team leaned close, pretending to adjust their napkins. "She's definitely his favorite," one murmured. "You don't get that kind of promotion talk after 3 months unless..." The other gave a knowing smirk. "Unless you're very convincing." Their laughter was soft but sharp, the kind that cuts through noise. I froze mid-sip, the champagne suddenly sour in my mouth. I wasn't supposed to hear that. I turned away, pretending to check my phone, pretending it didn't matter. But my heart was already thudding too loudly. Across the table, Ethan and Sophie were speaking with a small cluster of executives. She touched his arm when she laughed, light and effortless. He didn't pull away. Evelyn stood beside them, glowing with approval. "She's got great instincts," she said to one of the partners. "Very sharp, ambitious, someone with real potential." Potential for what? The question pulsed in my head over and over. I tried to focus on something else, anything else. The violin music, the glimmer of the chandeliers. But every sound around me blurred into static. I could feel the humiliation creeping in like a slow fever. Was everyone seeing something I refused to acknowledge? One of Ethan's colleagues leaned over to me, smiling too kindly. "You must be proud of him," she said. "He and Sophie make such a great team. The whole office talks about their chemistry. The word hit like a slap. I smiled tightly. "I'm sure they do." She nodded, clearly unaware of how hard I was gripping my clutch under the table. My knuckles ached from holding myself together. Every instinct screamed to stand up, to say something, to remind everyone who I was. But pride glued me in place. I wouldn't give them a scene. Not yet. Ethan eventually returned to our table looking flushed and triumphant. "Big investors from New York want to meet Sophie," he said, excitement buzzing in his voice. "Mom's introducing her." "Of course she is," I said quietly. But he didn't notice. From across the room, Evelyn was already leading Sophie through a circle of influential guests, her hand placed protectively on the girl's shoulder. "She's one to watch," I heard her say. "Mark my words, and she'll go far in this industry." It was surreal, watching it all unfold. The mother-in-law who never once praised my years of sacrifice was now beaming like a proud mentor to the woman who might be replacing me, professionally, socially, maybe even personally. As I watched Evelyn whisper in Sophie's ear, laughter following like perfume, a dark thought crept in. Maybe this had been her plan all along. To mold someone more suitable. Someone who fit her version of what Ethan deserved. I tried to shake it off, but the whispers kept circling the room. Quiet, poisonous, relentless. "Did you see the way he looks at her? They're inseparable at the office. His wife must be blind." Each comment landed like a stone in my chest. When Ethan came back, he didn't even notice how pale I looked. "Mom wants to introduce you to some people later," he said. "But don't mention the budget stuff, okay? Sophie's been handling that lately. My project, my system. I'd helped him build that presentation model when the company was barely surviving. Now it was hers." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my throat. "Of course," I said softly. "I'll stay out of it." He kissed my cheek absently and walked away. His cologne lingered for a moment, then faded into the noise. I tried to keep smiling, but inside, something was unraveling. Every glance toward them, every touch, every whisper, chipped away at the trust I had fought to maintain. As I stared at the glittering crowd, I realized the loneliness I felt wasn't new. It had just finally found a shape. Evelyn returned a while later, her smile sharp enough to slice. She leaned close, pretending to fix the clasp of my necklace, her voice a sugar-coated whisper. You might want to get used to sharing the spotlight. When the lights dimmed and waiters began pouring champagne into crystal flutes, I knew the speeches were about to start. That part of the evening had always been Ethan's favorite. The validation, the applause, the spotlight. I used to love it too, back when it felt like our success. But tonight, the glow from the chandeliers felt too harsh, the laughter too rehearsed. I could feel something coming, though I couldn't name it yet. Evelyn stood first, her presence commanding instant silence. She tapped her glass with a silver spoon, smiling with the kind of poise only years of practiced manipulation could buy. Tonight, she began, we celebrate not just success, but legacy. Her voice carried through the hall, syrupy, sweet, and perfectly pitched. Ethan has built something truly remarkable, a reflection of discipline, innovation, and, of course, family values. Polite applause filled the air. I clapped too, though my hands trembled slightly. She continued, and none of this would have been possible without the wonderful team that surrounds him. Especially, she paused dramatically, her gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Sophie. Especially this young woman here. Heads turned. Sophie flushed pink, smiling shyly as Evelyn beckoned her forward. The room buzzed. This brilliant intern, Evelyn said proudly, has brought fresh energy, creativity, and warmth to our company. She reminds me so much of myself when I was her age, confident, graceful, and destined for great things. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Ethan grinned, clearly proud, as if her success was somehow his own reflection. My chest tightened. I stared at my glass, pretending to be fascinated by the bubbles, praying she'd stop there. But Evelyn wasn't done. She never stopped when she could twist the knife deeper. Raising her flute, she added, "She's not just the future of this company. She's the future of this family." There was a beat of stunned silence, and then laughter. Awkward, unsure laughter that tried to smooth over the tension but only amplified it. Someone actually clapped. Another whistled. My heart lurched. Evelyn, basking in her own audacity, laughed lightly. "Oh, don't look so shocked," she said playfully. "Who knows? Maybe one day I'll be toasting her as my future daughter-in-law." This time the laughter was louder, brittle, forced, desperate to fill the heavy air. Every sound seemed to echo inside me, bouncing against the walls of my composure. I looked at Ethan. "Say something," I begged silently. "Stop her. Tell them it's inappropriate." But he didn't. He just stood there, awkwardly smiling, one hand on Sophie's shoulder as if to steady her. He didn't look at me. The image seared into my mind, his silence, her flushed face, his mother's smirk. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. Every cell in my body screamed to react, to throw the champagne in Evelyn's face, to shout that I'd been there before the luxury, before the suits, before the empire she was so proud of. But I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't real, but it was flawless. The same smile I'd worn through years of polite dinners and backhanded compliments. I lifted my glass, my hand steady even as my pulse thundered. "To family," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the crowd. A few people looked my way, unsure whether to respond. Evelyn just smirked, clearly pleased with herself. The bubbles touched my lips, but I couldn't swallow. The taste was bitter. My throat burned as I forced down the lump forming there. As the room dispersed into clusters of conversation, I felt invisible, like a ghost haunting my own life. I stood near the edge of the crowd, watching Ethan and Sophie laugh with investors. They looked like the stars of a movie I no longer belonged in. People passed by, offering me smiles laced with pity. One woman whispered, "You handled that so gracefully." I wanted to laugh. Grace wasn't what I felt. It was grief disguised as restraint. My vision blurred slightly. Maybe it was the champagne, maybe the tears I refused to let fall. I focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. As I watched Evelyn raise her glass again from across the room, clinking it lightly against Sophie's. Their laughter carried, bright and cruel. I turned toward the tall windows overlooking the city. The skyline glittered with a kind of freedom I couldn't reach. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, elegant, controlled, hollow. I wondered how many times I'd let moments like this pass unchallenged, how many times I'd traded my voice for peace that never came. Behind me, Ethan's voice rose in laughter again, and that sound, once my favorite in the world, now made my stomach twist. That was the moment I knew something inside me had shifted. The version of me who believed in quiet endurance, in loyalty without recognition, in patience that would one day be rewarded. She died in that ballroom. I stood there, back straight, face calm, tears threatening but never falling. The applause faded, the music returned, and the night went on like nothing had happened. But inside I knew something had broken beyond repair. I didn't say a word, not even when Ethan finally approached me, pretending nothing was wrong. Silence was the only thing keeping me from shattering completely. I didn't know it then, but that silence, that choice to say nothing, would become the most dangerous thing I ever did. I slipped out of the ballroom before anyone could notice. The sound of laughter trailed behind me like smoke, soft, lingering, suffocating. My heels clicked against the marble hallway, each step steadier than I felt. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just knew I had to get away before my face cracked, before the tears I'd swallowed all evening finally betrayed me. The restroom was empty. A chandelier hummed faintly above, its golden light reflecting across the mirrors. I stood in front of my reflection, breathing hard, watching the woman who stared back. Her eyes were rimmed red, her lipstick smudged slightly at the corner. She looked expensive, composed, and utterly broken. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there, watching myself breathe, shallow, uneven. My mind played back every humiliating moment of the night. Evelyn's smirk, Ethan's silence, Sophie's awkward smile as everyone laughed. Then, as if my memory wanted to be crueler, it started replaying everything that came before it. The years I had quietly built their foundation. I remembered the nights Ethan came home defeated, terrified the startup would collapse. I'd stayed up, crunching numbers, editing proposals, finding solutions while he slept beside me. I remembered skipping my graduate program so he could chase his once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I told myself we were a team, that my time would come later. Later never came, even when success finally arrived. It carried his name alone. The headlines called him a visionary. The company parties toasted to his genius. No one mentioned the woman who typed drafts at midnight, or soothed him through panic attacks before investor meetings. I had been part of the machinery, invisible until the gears started turning without me. I leaned closer to the mirror. My lipstick-stained smile looked almost defiant now. "You did this to yourself," I whispered. "You taught them you could survive without credit, without voice, without dignity." It wasn't a self-blame. It was a reckoning. The ache in my chest started to cool, solidifying into something sharper. Betrayal had burned through my veins all night, but now it was crystallizing into resolve. They had turned me into a ghost in my own life, but ghosts can haunt. I straightened, fixing the strap of my dress, reapplying my lipstick with slow precision. The act was deliberate, ritualistic. Every motion pulled me closer to calm. My breathing steadied. My reflection stopped trembling. "You wanted to humiliate me," I murmured to the empty room. My voice no longer shook. "Fine. I'll let you finish your act, and then I'll end the show." I remembered Evelyn's words. "She's the future of this family." It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration. She had chosen my replacement, paraded her in front of me, and dared me to break. But she underestimated the kind of woman I had become, the kind who learned long ago that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. In that mirror, I made a quiet promise. I would not scream. I would not beg for Ethan's defense or Evelyn's approval. I would not play the discarded wife in their public drama. I would play something else. Something colder, more patient, far more dangerous. When I finally left the restroom, my steps were measured, my head high. The noise from the ballroom grew louder as I approached. Laughter, glasses clinking, music swelling again. I paused at the doorway, watching them from a distance. They looked so comfortable in their performance, so certain of their control. Evelyn was laughing with a group of investors, Sophie beside her, glowing in borrowed light. Ethan caught my eye for a brief second, searching for emotion, maybe guilt, maybe fear. I gave him neither. I just smiled. The same serene, unreadable smile I'd worn earlier. But now it meant something entirely different. He didn't know it. But the woman standing at that door was no longer the same. The quiet, patient wife they'd dismissed had vanished somewhere between Evelyn's toast and the bathroom mirror. What remained was someone calculating, someone who understood that revenge didn't need rage. It needed timing. I took a final look at the crowd before stepping back inside. My pulse was steady, my expression flawless. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but I could already feel the wind shifting. And when it came, they wouldn't even see it until it was far too late. I wasn't looking for anything that night. I only wanted to survive it. After hours of pretending to belong in that glittering crowd, I just needed air. I wandered away from the ballroom again, past the velvet ropes, and down a quieter hallway that led toward the service elevators. That's when I heard them. Voices. Sharp, hushed, urgent. Sophie's voice came first. "You said it would clear before the audit," she whispered. "If the transfers show up under the charity account, we're both—" "Keep your voice down," a man snapped. I recognized him instantly. Martin, the finance executive who handled Evelyn's philanthropic fund. "Do you think I want to end up in prison over this?" She promised the offshore account would stay dormant. "Now your signature's on 2 of those reimbursements." I froze just beyond the corner. Their words hit me like cold water. Offshore account, reimbursements, her charity. For a second I thought I'd misheard. Maybe they were talking about someone else. But then Martin said Evelyn's name clear as day. "Your boss's mother has been moving money for years," he hissed. "And if anyone digs too deep, it won't be her name that shows up. It'll be yours." Sophie's voice trembled. She told me it was just a formality, that I'd get a bonus when it's done. The world tilted for a moment. I leaned against the wall, my heartbeat thrumming in my ears. Evelyn wasn't just cruel, she was dirty. And Sophie, the perfect intern, wasn't innocent either. She was part of it. They were both standing right there, handing me the truth I didn't even know I needed. I pulled my phone from my clutch, hand steady now, calmer than I'd been all night. My camera app opened with a quiet click. I didn't record video. That would be too obvious. Instead, I tapped the voice memo icon and slid the phone halfway out of sight, screen facing the wall. Martin's tone dropped even lower. "You need to get her to stop pushing for more. Tell her you're done signing anything. I'm not covering for that woman again." Sophie exhaled shakily. "What if she threatens me? She said she'd make sure I'm untouchable here." His laugh was bitter. "She can't even keep herself untouchable." A silence followed, heavy and dangerous. I could hear Sophie's heels shift, the nervous rustle of her clutch. "So, what happens if someone finds out?" she asked. Martin's voice hardened. "Then everyone goes down with her, including your precious mentor." I stopped recording and slipped the phone back into my clutch. My hands didn't shake this time. For the first time all evening, maybe for the first time in years, I felt completely still inside. Not angry, not afraid, just clear. I backed away from the wall quietly, retracing my steps until the hum of music grew louder again. My reflection in the hallway's glass door caught my eye as I passed. The same woman from before, but this time her eyes weren't red. They were focused. By the time I re-entered the ballroom, the chaos of the party felt almost laughably trivial. The laughter, the champagne, the flash of sequins, all of it seemed like background noise to a play I no longer needed to perform in. Evelyn was at the bar, surrounded by admirers, her charm perfectly polished. Sophie stood nearby, pale but smiling, holding her drink with both hands. She caught my eye for a brief second. Maybe guilt flickered there, maybe fear. I smiled. It was small, polite, entirely unreadable. Inside, though, something new settled into place. I wasn't the woman being pitied anymore. I wasn't the silent observer in someone else's story. I was holding something far more powerful than their approval. Proof. I thought back to Evelyn's cruel toast, to Ethan's silence, to the whispers that had followed me all night. Every humiliation now felt strangely necessary. If none of it had happened, I never would have left the ballroom. I never would have heard the truth. When Ethan came over, oblivious, and asked if I was feeling better, I almost laughed. "Much better," I said softly. And for once I meant it. He didn't notice the way my fingers rested lightly on the clasp of my clutch, where my phone, and my leverage, now lived. Let them keep their little empire of deceit for a few more hours. Let them toast to their own lies one last time. Because soon, very soon, the real celebration would begin. Mine. When I walked back into that ballroom, it felt like stepping onto a stage I suddenly controlled. The chandeliers still sparkled, the laughter still flowed, but everything had changed. Not for them, only for me. They thought I'd disappeared to cry, to lick my wound somewhere private. What they didn't realize was that I'd returned reborn, polished in composure, my pain weaponized into purpose. Evelyn noticed me first. Her lips curved in that familiar, patronizing smile, the kind that used to slice through my confidence. "There she is," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Our quiet little star. Feeling better, dear?" I smiled back, serene, measured. "Much better," I replied. She took it as submission. That was her first mistake. The music softened as dinner was served. I could feel the energy shifting. People laughing around me, blissfully unaware that the foundations of their perfect evening were about to fracture. The intern, Sophie, hovered near Ethan again, laughing at every word he said. I caught her glancing at me now and then, eyes darting away too quickly. She looked like someone trying to pretend she hadn't just argued about fraud in a hallway. I clinked my fork lightly against the rim of my glass, pretending to be lost in thought, while my other hand slipped my phone under the table. One quick scroll through my contacts, Daniel, my oldest friend, a corporate lawyer who'd once helped Ethan set up his company's original contracts. The irony wasn't lost on me. My message to him was brief. "Need you to listen to this. It's urgent. Keep it confidential." Then I attached the audio file and hit send. Seconds later, I saw the delivered notification. A calm washed over me that felt almost luxurious. Around me, the evening glittered on. Ethan stood to thank the board for their trust and partnership, the words hollow to my ears now. His mother laughed too loudly at every compliment directed her way. People clapped for them like a trained audience, none realizing that their leading lady had just set the script on fire behind the curtain. Sophie caught my gaze once more. There was something frantic in her expression, like a performer realizing her lines were missing. She must have known something was wrong. That kind of fear doesn't hide well. Evelyn didn't notice. She was too busy relishing her spotlight. I didn't drink. I didn't even fake a toast this time. I just smiled, softly, continuously, letting them believe I'd accepted my place as the quiet, discarded wife. The more invisible they thought I was, the better. Daniel's reply came 15 minutes later. "This is serious. I'm sending it to the firm's compliance division and the board's external auditor right now. Don't tell anyone you sent it." I read it once, locked my phone, and looked up as waiters brought out dessert. Perfect little chocolate towers drizzled with gold leaf. Everyone oohed and awed like we were in some royal banquet. Evelyn leaned over to Sophie again, whispering something that made her laugh nervously. I rested my chin on my hand and simply watched. It was almost poetic, how calm the world looked right before a storm. The champagne sparkled, the orchestra played, and every face in that room smiled, except mine. I wasn't smiling for show anymore. I was smiling for justice, for karma, for the quiet power of patience, because by the time dessert was served, the investigation had already begun. It started quietly, so quietly that if I hadn't been watching so closely, I might have missed it. A pair of suited men entered the ballroom, not in tuxedos, but in dark, deliberate uniforms of professionalism. They weren't guests. Their movements were too precise, their smiles too thin. I recognized one of them from a charity audit Evelyn had bragged about charming her way through last year. My pulse steadied. They were here faster than I expected. The change in atmosphere was almost imperceptible at first. Laughter dimmed, replaced by small glances toward the entrance as security whispered to hotel management. One of the men flashed an identification badge. I didn't need to hear the words. The ripple of unease spreading across the tables said it all. Sophie's expression was the first to crack. Her confident posture dissolved into stiff stillness, fingers gripping her champagne flute like it was a lifeline. I watched the color drain from her face as she exchanged a terrified glance with Evelyn. Whatever lie they'd rehearsed in private had no room to breathe here. Evelyn, ever the actress, rose from her seat with a brittle smile. "Is there an issue?" she asked the nearest manager, loud enough for attention, but her voice lacked its usual silk. There was a tremor underneath, small but deliciously telling. The manager leaned in, whispering something that made her blink twice. I sipped my water slowly, savoring every second. Around us, conversations faltered. Ethan frowned, confused but trying to stay composed. I could almost hear his inner monologue. This can't be happening at my event. The auditors began moving between tables, polite but firm, speaking to a few senior employees. One of them gestured discreetly toward Evelyn and Sophie. Evelyn's hands fluttered to her pearls. "This must be a misunderstanding," she said, laughing too brightly. "We'll sort this out in private." But there was no private left, not tonight. The entire ballroom had gone tense, like a collective breath being held. The orchestra stopped mid-note. The chatter thinned to whispers. Even the waiters hesitated with their dessert trays, unsure if they should continue. I leaned back, appearing as calm as ever, the picture of detached composure. Inside, I felt an exquisite blend of vindication and sorrow, the kind that comes from watching justice slowly, beautifully bloom. Sophie tried to retreat, murmuring something about needing fresh air, but one of the auditors blocked her path gently. Her hands trembled. I think there's been some confusion," she stammered. "I'm just an intern." The man's expression didn't change. "Then you'll have nothing to worry about," he said. Evelyn's laughter grew strained, each word she spoke digging her deeper into panic. "This is absolutely inappropriate. You can't barge into a company event." "Ma'am," one auditor interrupted evenly. "We're following a compliance directive authorized by the board. We'll keep this discreet if possible." Discreet. The word echoed like irony in gold trim. There was nothing discreet about the dozens of eyes now watching the mighty Evelyn Langston, the woman who'd belittled me for years, suddenly stripped of her composure. Ethan finally stood, confused and defensive. "What's going on here? This is my company's private function." His voice cracked slightly on company. Even he could sense the shift. This wasn't his room anymore. I didn't say a word. I simply folded my napkin neatly beside my plate and smiled. Sophie sat down abruptly, staring at her phone like she could text herself out of consequence. Evelyn whispered furiously into her ear, her posture rigid, jaw clenched. I'd seen that same posture when she lectured me for not fitting the image years ago. Only this time, she wasn't the one in control. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. The tension swirled, thick and electric. Someone coughed. Another guest muttered, "What's happening?" The rumor spread faster than oxygen. Phrases like, "embezzlement and fraud investigation," flickered through the crowd. The auditors conferred, quietly with security before, motioning for Evelyn and Sophie to follow them. Evelyn tried one last desperate smile. "Darling," she called to Ethan, "stay calm. I'll handle this." But her voice broke on handle. As they were escorted toward the exit, Sophie glanced back. Not at Ethan, not at anyone else. She looked at me. For a brief, trembling second, realization dawned in her eyes. She knew. I held her gaze, expression unreadable, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then she was gone. Ethan stood frozen, the golden boy with no script to follow. Guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to be absorbed in their phones or desserts. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was divine. That was the moment I understood something fundamental about revenge. It doesn't need to roar. Sometimes it's a whisper that makes the loudest sound, and that whisper had just undone their empire, right in front of me. The unraveling wasn't a storm. It was a quiet earthquake, one that tore through silk smiles and shattered crystal charm. The auditors had returned after a brief huddle with management, their tone sharper now, their posture firm. This wasn't a courtesy visit anymore. This was an exposure. They walked directly toward Evelyn and Sophie, who stood near the dais trying to look casual. Sophie's hands twisted the hem of her dress. Evelyn's frozen smile was beginning to tremble. Ethan hovered close, whispering frantic reassurances that sounded more like self-preservation than comfort. I stayed seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my face a calm mask while my mind recorded every second. "Mrs. Langston," one of the auditors said, voice cutting clean through the murmuring crowd. "We've identified irregularities in your foundation's expense accounts. Transfers made to unverified offshore entities." The word offshore landed like a gunshot. Conversation stopped. Forks froze midair. Someone gasped audibly. Evelyn blinked, clearly unprepared for public confrontation. "That's ridiculous," she stammered. "My accountant, there must be an error." But the man interrupted smoothly. "We've already contacted the accountant. He confirmed the authorizations came directly from your account, approved by your office email." Sophie's breathing quickened. She looked around like a trapped animal. I didn't handle those files personally," she blurted. "I just followed Mrs. Langston's instructions." Evelyn's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me?" The crowd rippled. Her voice, once commanding, now cracked under disbelief. Sophie looked ready to faint, eyes darting to Ethan, silently pleading for help. But Ethan could only stare, jaw slack, the golden polish of his composure finally cracking. The auditors exchanged a glance. "Miss Carter," one said evenly, "you signed multiple authorizations for reimbursements tied to these accounts." He held up a printed document. The logo of Evelyn's Women's Upliftment Fund shimmered under the chandelier lights. Sophie's lips quivered. "She told me it was for donor incentives," she cried. "She said it was standard practice." Evelyn's face turned scarlet. "You ungrateful little liar. How dare you—" "Ma'am," the auditor interjected, "I'd suggest you both remain calm. There's a clear pattern of misuse here. Further discussion will occur with legal counsel present." But the crowd wasn't waiting for counsel. They were already whispering. Sharp, scandalized murmurs cutting through the air. Fraud. Offshore. Charity money. Words that stuck like thorns in Evelyn's carefully curated reputation. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My heart was steady, strangely detached. After all the years of being dismissed, ignored, and patronized, I wasn't angry anymore. I was witnessing justice. Slow, unhurried, inevitable. Evelyn's voice rose again, wild now. "This is an ambush. Who sent you? Who would do this to us?" The irony nearly made me laugh. Us. There was never an us when I was standing on the outside of her empire. Now suddenly she wanted solidarity. The senior auditor's tone softened slightly. "We received an anonymous tip supported by audio evidence and timestamps that matched financial irregularities. The board has authorized immediate suspension of all related accounts pending investigation." Anonymous. The word lingered like perfume. I could feel Evelyn's eyes scanning the room for a culprit. When her gaze brushed over me, I gave her the same polite smile I'd given her all night. Her expression faltered. She recognized something in it she couldn't name. Ethan finally stepped forward, face pale, voice trembling. "Mom, tell me this isn't true. Please." Her hands shook. "I did this for you. For the company. You think success comes without shortcuts. I made sure you had the life you deserve." The room exhaled in collective disbelief. Cameras flashed from phones. No one even tried to hide it anymore. The story of the night had just written itself. Sophie began to cry. "I swear I thought it was legal." "She said everyone does it." Evelyn rounded on her, venom sharp. "Don't you dare put this on me, you pathetic child. You wouldn't even have a job without my approval." "Enough," the lead auditor said, voice like iron. "Both of you will need to accompany us for statements." Hotel security stepped closer, discreet but firm. Evelyn stumbled, clutching her clutch like it might save her. Sophie's sobs filled the silence between heartbeats. Ethan didn't move. His eyes darted between them, his mother, his intern, his crumbling pride, and then finally landed on me. For the first time all evening, he seemed to actually see me, not the wife he'd grown bored of, not the accessory he brought to events for image, but the woman sitting perfectly composed while his world fell apart. I met his gaze steadily, no triumph in my face, just quiet truth. I wanted him to feel it, the realization that I'd stopped needing his defense long ago. The crowd parted as Evelyn and Sophie were escorted toward the exit. Someone whispered, "How humiliating." Another murmured, "She was supposed to be untouchable." As the doors closed behind them, the ballroom deflated. All glitter gone, all grandeur hollow. The orchestra sat frozen, instruments lowered, waiting for permission to breathe again. Ethan turned back to me, eyes wet, disbelief written all over him. "Did you know about this?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I held his gaze calm as glass. "Not until tonight," I said softly. "But I listened." He blinked, like the word itself carried more weight than any accusation. Around us, the chaos continued. Murmurs, footsteps, the soft hum of downfall. And then, across the room, Evelyn turned her head one last time before security let her out. Our eyes met, hers filled with fury, confusion, and something deeper. Recognition. And then she looked at me, as if she finally saw who I really was. The ballroom emptied slowly, like air leaking from a balloon that had stretched too long. Guests whispered excuses as they left, leaving behind half-finished glasses and the faint smell of panic. Ethan followed his mother and the auditors toward the hallway, but I didn't move. I stayed seated, my hands folded on the white tablecloth, watching the chandelier lights tremble slightly in the silence. Minutes passed before the muffled voices began filtering in from the corridor. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when a lifetime of silence has been your language, you learn to listen carefully. Evelyn's voice came first, sharp, cracking. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Standing there like a coward while they humiliate me?" Ethan's reply came low, controlled. "You humiliated yourself, Mom. I spent years defending you, defending the foundation. And now I find out you were laundering donations through fake projects." Her heels clicked against the marble, pacing. "I did it for your image, for this company. I made sure no one saw your wife dragging us down with her lack of ambition." I froze. Her words hit like old wounds reopening. But Ethan interrupted, his tone suddenly louder, rawer. "Enough. You don't get to talk about her like that anymore. She's the only person who ever believed in me before your name meant anything." The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Evelyn must have been stunned. For once, she had no clever retort. I stood, taking a few steps toward the corridor, though I stayed out of sight. Ethan's voice was shaking now. "You turned me against her. Every time she tried to help, you called her a distraction. You made me believe I'd outgrown her, when she's the one who built the ground I stand on." "Ethan," Evelyn pleaded, "you don't understand." "No, Mom," he said softly. "I finally do." Footsteps moved closer. I stepped back instinctively, heart pounding. Evelyn brushed past the doorway, face pale and lips pressed thin, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. She didn't look at me as she hurried toward the elevators, pride collapsing under its own weight. Ethan lingered behind her, his shoulders slumped, the confident CEO facade stripped away. When he finally turned toward me, his eyes looked different. Older, softer, emptied of performance. He walked up slowly, stopping just a few feet away. "You knew," he said quietly. "It wasn't an accusation. It was awe. The way someone speaks when they realize how blind they've been." "I heard something I wasn't supposed to," I said. "And I acted." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to do when nervous. "You saved us, and I didn't even deserve it." I said nothing. My silence wasn't cold this time. It was powerful, the kind that made truth echo louder. He looked down, voice breaking. "I'm sorry for not standing up for you, for letting her treat you like you didn't belong. You did. You always did. For a long time, I just watched him. The man I once loved had been buried under his mother's ambition for years. And now, finally, I could see traces of the person I fell for. But the apology, sincere as it was, couldn't erase everything. It wasn't my job to absolve him. It was his to grow." He took a hesitant step closer. "I don't know if you can forgive me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I exhaled slowly, meeting his eyes. "Forgiveness isn't the point," I replied. "Understanding is." The words hung between us like the faintest bridge, fragile, uncertain, but real. Outside the ballroom windows, dawn had started to bleed through the city skyline, tinting the glass gold. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't need to shout, to demand to be seen. My silence said everything I ever needed it to. And this time he finally listened. 3 weeks later, the world looked the same. But it wasn't. Headlines had done their damage, elegant fonts spelling Evelyn Langston's downfall across every financial column. Charity queen under investigation for misuse of funds. Photographs of her exiting her home under the weight of flashbulbs replaced the glossy magazine covers she once adored. The same society that worshipped her now dissected her every choice, every dress, every silence. Sophie, the intern with the bright smile and careful charm, resigned within days. A quiet email circulated through the company, effective immediately. No farewell post, no tears, just gone. I imagined her returning to her parents' house, trading designer heels for old sneakers, wondering when admiration had turned to pity. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. She'd been a pawn, just like I once was. As for me, I stayed still at first, not out of fear, but reflection. I watched my phone flood with messages from colleagues and acquaintances, most of them disguised apologies. "You always seemed so supportive. We never knew she treated you that way." They were all too eager to rewrite history, to paint themselves as bystanders instead of accomplices. I didn't reply. Some things didn't deserve closure. Instead, I turned my energy towards something that had always waited quietly for me: my own business. The design studio I'd once shelved to support Ethan's empire became my new home. I worked late nights, drank too much coffee, and rediscovered the thrill of making choices that didn't need permission. I wasn't rebuilding from ashes. I was building from wisdom. Ethan reached out a few times, each attempt softer than the last. A long text first: "I miss you. I hope we can talk." Then a call I let ring out. Finally, a handwritten letter left at my office door. The handwriting was familiar, the tone humble. He said he was taking responsibility for the company, for the mess, for his own blindness. He asked for a chance to start again, not as CEO and wife, but as equals. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and slipped it into my desk drawer, beneath client contracts and color swatches. Not out of cruelty, but because the decision wasn't about him anymore. For once, I didn't need to rush toward forgiveness or vengeance. I simply wanted peace. When I saw him again weeks later, it was by coincidence, at a cafe near the business district. He looked thinner, quieter, more human. He smiled cautiously. "You look happy," he said. "I am," I replied truthfully. He nodded, as if that was both the answer he wanted and feared. "Do you think we could ever—" I stopped him gently. "Ethan," I said, "maybe we already had our story." Maybe this is the ending it was always meant to have. There was no anger, no bitterness, just stillness. The kind that comes after surviving a storm. When I left the cafe, the afternoon sunlight felt warm on my face, like a quiet applause only I could hear. I realized I no longer needed anyone to witness my strength. I'd become my own proof. At home, my reflection met me like an old friend. Not the trembling woman who once forced a smile in a ballroom, but someone calm, self-possessed, untouchable. My phone buzzed with another message from Ethan. I didn't open it. Some endings didn't need words. Silence was eloquent enough. They had wanted to humiliate me. They'd built their empire on my quietness, believing it meant weakness. But they forgot something crucial. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, it's just the sound of strategy. And now finally, it was the sound of freedom. 6 months later, the chandeliers shimmered above a different kind of room, one that finally belonged to me. The Aurora Foundation had become more than an idea. It was a promise fulfilled, a space for women who'd lost everything to betrayal, careers, reputations, confidence, to rebuild from the ground up. Tonight was our first charity gala. Ironically, it was being held in the very ballroom where my humiliation once began. The same golden walls, the same mirrored pillars, even the same pianist whose melodies had floated over laughter that night. But the difference was in the air. It hummed with something new. Strength. Freedom. The calm after the storm I had survived. Guests moved gracefully across the marble floor, murmuring about the foundation's success. I caught fragments of conversation. She turned it all around. Unbelievable resilience. Her stories legendary. Their words didn't inflate me. They simply reminded me how far I'd come from that trembling woman clutching her champagne glass in silent despair. I wore a simple ivory gown this time. Elegant but unpretentious, my hair swept back, no need for showmanship. Every decision tonight was deliberate, quiet, powerful. I had become my own definition of luxury, peace. The event was nearly perfect, until I saw them. Ethan and his mother. They arrived late, as always, making an entrance as if the world still revolved around them. But something was different now. The confidence in their posture was a ghost of what it used to be. Evelyn's once flawless composure was cracked, polite smiles hiding public shame. The charity scandal hadn't sent her to prison, but it had stripped her of her empire, her board seats, her social armor. She was merely a guest now, not a queen. Ethan approached first. His suit was immaculate, his eyes unsure. "Congratulations, Claire," he said softly. "This is beautiful." "Thank you," I replied. My tone was calm, measured, not cold, just complete. He hesitated, searching my face. "I'm glad you're doing well." "I am." And that was all there was left to say. The night moved forward with speeches, applause, and laughter. Women from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, single mothers, survivors, spoke of their journeys. Their courage painted the night with meaning far deeper than any corporate toast ever could. When the time came for my speech, I stood at the podium beneath a soft cascade of light. The crowd fell silent. My heart was steady, not from confidence but from peace. "Good evening, everyone," I began. "A year ago, I stood in this very room feeling invisible. I'd convinced myself that silence was safety, that quiet endurance would protect me. But I learned something powerful in that silence." I paused, letting the room lean in. Evelyn looked down at her glass. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on me. "Silence," I said, "isn't weakness. It's preparation. It's the gathering of strength before the sound of thunder." The audience stilled. Then a murmur of appreciation swept through them. I raised my glass, the crystal catching the light. "So tonight I want to propose a different kind of toast. To those who mistake silence for weakness, may they one day hear its thunder." The room erupted in applause. Not the forced kind of polite society, but something raw and real, the sound of recognition. I saw tears glisten in the eyes of women who had been dismissed, betrayed, underestimated. For them, and for the woman I once was, I lifted my glass a little higher. As everyone clinked glasses around me, I caught Evelyn's reflection in a nearby mirror. Her expression was unreadable, part regret, part realization. For the first time, she didn't look like my opponent, just another woman who'd built her power on control, only to discover its emptiness. Ethan stepped forward afterward, his voice low. "You really have changed," he said. "No," I replied gently. "I just stopped apologizing for who I am." He smiled faintly, as if that truth stung and soothed him all at once. Then he walked away, swallowed by the crowd. Later that night, when the music softened and the guests began to leave, I stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The cool air brushed against my skin, and the skyline glittered like an orchestra of second chances. Below, the laughter of guests drifted upward, free, unburdened. I closed my eyes, remembering the woman I'd been, silent, small, careful. And then I opened them again to the woman I'd become, strong, unshaken, infinite. I lifted my glass one last time, whispering to the night, to endings that were really beginnings. The lights shimmered, the music swelled, and the world, finally, was mine to define. They say time reveals all truths, but I've learned it doesn't just reveal them, it refines them. Time has a way of undressing arrogance, stripping away pretense, and leaving only what's real. When I think back to that night, the glittering chandeliers, the brittle laughter, the humiliation disguised as humor, I no longer feel pain. I feel clarity, because that night didn't break me. It introduced me to myself. People like Evelyn mistake cruelty for class. They believe control equals respect, that dominance wins devotion. But the truth doesn't need to shout. It waits, it listens, and then it arrives, dressed in time, not vengeance. For so long I thought silence meant surrender. I thought it was what weak people chose when their words no longer mattered. But silence, true silence, is power restrained. It's composure in motion. It's the space between what they expect you to do and what you actually become. When they mocked me, I stayed quiet. When they dismissed me, I stayed kind. When they tried to erase me, I chose to build something they couldn't touch. Myself. That's the kind of revenge that doesn't rot the soul. It renews it. I used to crave validation, applause, approval, acknowledgement. But I've learned that real power is found in peace, not performance. I no longer need to win the argument or prove the point. My existence, calm, whole, and unbothered, is the proof. Evelyn will spend her days chasing the illusion she built, trying to patch the cracks with charm and denial. The intern will rebuild somewhere else, carrying the lesson of ambition without conscience. And Ethan, he'll finally understand that love without respect is just dependence dressed up in vows. As for me, I've stopped looking back. I no longer rehearse what I should have said or how I should have reacted, because my silence said everything. It said, "You cannot break a woman who no longer needs your approval to stand tall." Now, when people ask me how I found the strength to forgive, I tell them this: forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over proof. I don't need them to see I was right. I just need to know I am free. And so, I end this chapter with no bitterness, no revenge, just resolve. Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. And those who mistake it for weakness will always, eventually, hear its thunder.